Bright neon lights, dice rolling, a city that never sleeps. Las Vegas looks like pure entertainment, but its foundation was built on crime and cash. The Mafia didn't just play in Vegas, they owned it. Every casino, every table, every jackpot, a piece of it flowed straight into their pockets. It all started with a dream in the desert and a man named Bugsy Siegel, who saw fortune where no one else did. This is not just Vegas history. This is the story of how the mob created a billion-dollar empire, one casino at a time. Las Vegas, in the 1940s, was nothing more than a stretch of desert, a forgotten place where tumbleweeds rolled through dry streets and the sun beat down without mercy. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't rich. And it certainly wasn't the world-famous destination it is today. Back then, it was a town people drove through on their way to somewhere else, not a place they planned to stay. But in that emptiness, in that dusty silence, one man saw something different. His name was Bugsy Siegel, and unlike everyone else, he believed the desert could be turned into gold. Bugsy was not your ordinary gangster. He wasn't just another tough guy in a cheap suit barking orders from the shadows. He had charisma, style, and ambition that stretched far beyond the crowded streets of New York or Los Angeles. He moved with the confidence of a Hollywood star, always sharply dressed, always ready with a smile that could charm women and a glare that could terrify men. Bugsy had been part of the mob's bloody rise on the East Coast, making his reputation as a fearless enforcer and a founding figure of the syndicate. But deep inside, he didn't want to be remembered as just another mobster with blood on his hands. He wanted a legacy. He wanted something permanent, something people would talk about long after he was gone. When Bugsy first looked out at the Nevada desert, where Las Vegas barely existed, he saw opportunity. Nevada had legalized gambling years earlier, but the casinos were pathetic little roadside joints, smoky rooms with flickering lights, cheap liquor, and crooked card tables. Nothing about them screamed luxury. Nothing about them demanded attention. To Bugsy, that was the gap. He envisioned something grand, something the world had never seen before, a palace of gambling, luxury, and entertainment that would attract the rich, the famous, and the dangerous all under one roof. It would be more than a casino. It would be a paradise built by the mob, a cash machine dressed in marble and silk. And he had the perfect name for it, the Flamingo. The name alone carried a kind of magic. Flamingos were exotic, elegant, unforgettable. They stood out just like Bugsy wanted his casino to stand out. In his mind, the Flamingo would be the place where movie stars could rub shoulders with mobsters, where millionaires could gamble their fortunes while showgirls danced under crystal chandeliers. It would redefine gambling in America. And for the mob, it would be the perfect front to rake in millions, skimming the profits off the top while the world clapped and cheered. But dreams cost money, and Bugsy's dream was going to cost more than most men could ever imagine. He didn't have the fortune to make it happen on his own, but he had connections. He turned to his partners in the syndicate, the same men he had grown up with in the underworld. Chief among them was Meyer Lansky, the mob's quiet genius, a man who didn't need flash to command respect. Lansky was skeptical at first. Vegas seemed like a dead-end town, too far from the real action, too risky for serious investment. But Bugsy was persuasive. He painted a picture of endless streams of tourists, of Hollywood elites flying in just to play, of money flowing through the tables day and night. He spoke with passion, with vision, and eventually the bosses gave in. They would bankroll the Flamingo. Construction began in 1945, and from the first day it was chaos. Bugsy demanded perfection. Nothing was too expensive. Nothing was too extravagant. He ordered Italian marble, custom glass, imported furniture, the best designers money could buy. He wanted the Flamingo to outshine every casino in America, but every demand raised the price, and the money poured out faster than anyone could control. What was supposed to cost $1 million ballooned into $6. The mob back east grew restless. They had trusted Bugsy with their money, and all they saw were delays, excuses, and expenses. But Bugsy didn't care. He wasn't just building a casino. He was building a monument, and monuments take time. Finally, on December 26, 1946, the doors to the Flamingo opened. Bugsy stood there in his tailored suit, flashing his trademark smile, ready to welcome the world to his masterpiece. Hollywood stars came out for the grand event: Lana Turner, Clark Gable, Judy Garland. The casino gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble, its lights cutting through the desert night like a beacon. On the surface, it looked like everything Bugsy had promised, but beneath the shine, disaster lurked. The hotel rooms weren't finished. The air conditioning failed in the middle of the desert heat. The kitchen couldn't keep up with the demands of the glamorous guests. And as if fate wanted to mock Bugsy's grand vision, the skies opened, and rain poured down on the desert, turning the glamorous night into a soggy mess. The Flamingo's opening was a humiliation. Guests complained, gamblers left early, and the newspapers mocked it as a failure. The mob bosses fumed. They had poured millions into Bugsy's dream, and now it looked like nothing more than a money pit. But Bugsy refused to give up. He poured more energy into fixing the problems, completing the unfinished sections, and polishing the details. He was obsessed, and he believed that if he could just get it right, the Flamingo would rise from the ashes and prove everyone wrong. Over the next few months, Bugsy's gambles started to pay off. As the casino stabilized, it began attracting crowds. The glamorous reputation grew. The money started rolling in, and suddenly the mob bosses could see what Bugsy had seen all along. The Flamingo wasn't just a casino. It was the beginning of an empire. Las Vegas transformed before their eyes, from a dusty desert stop into a shimmering oasis of wealth and sin, and behind it all was Bugsy's vision. But in the world of the mob, vision is never enough. Money talks louder than dreams, and mistakes are never forgiven. Bugsy's reckless spending, his arrogance, and his constant clashes with the syndicate had earned him enemies among the very men who had once been his allies. To them, the Flamingo might have been a success, but Bugsy had taken too long and cost too much. And in the Mafia, debts are not forgotten. As Las Vegas began to boom, whispers grew louder. The Flamingo was running, the profits were flowing, but Bugsy Siegel's days were numbered. He had built the palace, but it was the mob that would inherit it. The man who had turned the desert into gold had also dug his own grave. And so, the story of Las Vegas, as we know it, began with a dreamer, a gangster, and a desert gamble that changed the course of American history forever. Las Vegas was changing, and the desert was no longer just a barren wasteland. The neon lights flickered to life, illuminating streets that had once been empty, and the sound of slot machines clanging echoed through newly built casinos. The city was waking up, and the Mafia was behind every heartbeat of it. Bugsy Siegel had lit the spark with the Flamingo, but the real empire was about to take shape. From Chicago to New York, Cleveland to Detroit, mob families watched closely. They didn't just see a casino. They saw a machine for making unimaginable wealth. Millions of dollars could be funneled through the tables, through the games, through the lights, and into the pockets of those who knew how to handle it. The families invested secretly, quietly moving funds to Vegas, while the city's visitors had no idea who really controlled the gambling halls. The Flamingo had proven that luxury could draw in the crowds, but the Mafia needed more than one casino to dominate the desert. Slowly, they began acquiring other properties, sometimes building new ones from scratch, sometimes taking over struggling operations. Each casino became a front for laundering money from the East Coast rackets, bootlegging profits, illegal gambling proceeds, and other ventures that flowed seamlessly into the glittering lights of Vegas. What the tourists saw were entertainers and bright marquees. What the mob saw was numbers flashing across ledgers, counting in the hundreds of thousands, then millions. Slot machines became tiny engines of profit. Every pull of the handle, every shuffle of cards, every roll of the dice was a small victory for the mob. The games were legitimate in appearance, but the setup favored those who owned the tables. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet it was effective. The more the tourists played, the fatter the Mafia's wallets grew. Cash moved quietly from the tables into secret accounts and off to mob families back east, building a fortune that was untouchable and untraceable. Beyond the money, Vegas became a stage for influence. Mobsters could see who came and went, who spent lavishly, who made connections. The casinos weren't just financial machines. They were networks, social hubs, places where alliances were formed and deals were struck in smoke-filled back rooms. Every high roller who walked in unknowingly played a role in building the empire, every champagne toast and roulette bet contributing to a machine that grew larger with each passing day. By the late 1940s, it wasn't just the Flamingo. Other hotels and casinos began to rise under mob influence: the Desert Inn, the Sands, the Sahara. Each one was a carefully orchestrated blend of glamour and business, a front for wealth accumulation disguised as entertainment. The mob's fingerprints were on everything, yet to the outside world, Vegas was simply a city of dreams. Nobody realized that behind the lights, the dice, and the glamorous showgirls, a vast network of organized crime controlled the flow of millions. Every victory at the tables reinforced the Mafia's power. The more money flowed in, the bolder they became. They started influencing hiring decisions, deciding which entertainers would perform, who would manage the floor, and which high-stakes gamblers were allowed into private rooms. Vegas was no longer just a desert city. It was a mob city, a carefully controlled playground where wealth was generated and guarded with precision. The empire grew not only through casinos, but also through side ventures. Restaurants, nightclubs, and bars were added to the properties, each one a revenue stream and another layer of control. Wealth wasn't just made at the tables. It was everywhere, in every corner of the empire, flowing smoothly like a hidden river beneath the glitz and glamour. Every new casino added complexity and scale, but the mob managed it with a combination of ruthlessness and business savvy. It wasn't always easy. Construction delays, financing issues, and disputes between families occasionally threatened the operation. But in the world of organized crime, patience and strategy were as valuable as muscle. The mob learned to balance risk and reward, using each casino as a learning ground for bigger and bolder ventures. Las Vegas became their laboratory, the desert proving ground for an empire built on gambling, luxury, and secrecy. By the mid-1950s, the Mafia's presence in Las Vegas was undeniable, though invisible to the casual visitor. The city was booming, tourists pouring in from across the country, lured by the lights and the promise of fortune. Each hotel, each casino, each table contributed to the mob's coffers, and the wealth that flowed into the pockets of these organized crime families was staggering. Millions were being made quietly, systematically, with precision, without any outsiders realizing just how deeply the mob had embedded itself into the fabric of the city. Las Vegas had transformed from a dusty desert outpost into a shining empire of wealth, and the Mafia had built it from the ground up. Every slot machine pull, every blackjack hand, every dice roll contributed to the growing fortune. The city was alive, vibrant, and unstoppable, and the mob was at the center of it all, orchestrating an empire of money, power, and influence, one casino at a time. And as the lights of Las Vegas reflected off the desert sky, it was clear the mob wasn't just in the city. They had created it. The empire was no longer just a dream. It was a reality, and the flow of money was unstoppable. In a city built on chance, the Mafia had stacked the odds in their favor, and the desert gamble had paid off beyond anyone's imagination. The casinos were only the beginning. Behind the velvet ropes and polished floors, the Mafia's empire extended into every corner of Las Vegas life, and the wealth they generated was on full display for those who knew where to look. The city's glittering surface was designed to dazzle visitors, but beneath it, every champagne toast, every glittering gown, every sparkling light was part of a carefully orchestrated machine. The mob had built not just casinos, but an entire ecosystem of profit and power. At the center of it all were the showgirls, the entertainers who brought glamour to the desert night. They danced under chandeliers, their costumes bedazzled with sequins and feathers, their movements hypnotic under the bright lights. Tourists clapped and cheered, unaware that every ticket sold, every drink purchased, and every seat filled was contributing to the mob's coffers. These women were stars, icons of Las Vegas, yet they were also an essential part of the empire, drawing crowds that ensured the money never stopped flowing. Luxury suites, private gaming rooms, and high-stakes tables catered to the wealthiest gamblers, men who thought they were escaping into a world of chance and indulgence. In reality, they were walking into the heart of the mob's machine. Every hand of blackjack, every roll of dice, every spin of the roulette wheel was subtly manipulated to maximize profits, not through cheating the players outright, but through careful control of the environment, the odds, and the flow of the games. The money moved effortlessly from the tables to the mob's pockets, hidden beneath layers of legitimate business operations and luxurious distractions. Nightclubs became another layer of the empire. The mob invested in elegant lounges where big bands played, where celebrities mingled with mobsters, and where high rollers could drink and gamble in private. It was more than entertainment. It was marketing, networking, and profit, all in one. Wealth was displayed everywhere. In the champagne fountains, the custom-made furniture, the exotic cars lining the valet, and the dazzling lights that stretched as far as the eye could see. To the visitor, it was a fantasy. To the mob, it was a system, generating millions with every night the doors stayed open. The Mafia's influence extended beyond the casinos themselves. Restaurants, bars, and retail establishments associated with the hotels were carefully monitored. The mob controlled hiring, management, and financial flows. They knew which entertainers could draw the biggest crowds, which high-stakes players would spend the most, and how to keep the tourists coming back for more. It was a finely tuned empire, where every dollar had a path from the visitor's pocket to the mob's vaults, and every operation reinforced the wealth and power of the families who controlled it. Bugsy Siegel had set the tone with the Flamingo, but now the entire city operated on his model. Each new casino became more elaborate, more luxurious, and more profitable. The money flowed in, and with it came influence. The mob could shape the city itself, deciding where new hotels would rise, which streets would flourish, and which neighborhoods would remain untouched. Vegas became their playground, their laboratory, and their stage all at once. Every day brought new opportunities. Private tournaments, celebrity events, and high-profile shows attracted the wealthy and powerful from across the country. Each gamble, each purchase, each performance was a tiny cog in the empire's vast machinery. Money moved seamlessly, invisible to anyone not in the inner circle. The city's glow reflected not only the lights of luxury, but the power and wealth of the mob itself. Yet, despite all this extravagance, the Mafia kept a careful eye on the balance. They lived lavishly, yes, diamonds, tailored suits, elegant cars, but excess was controlled. The wealth was meant to grow, not vanish. Vegas became both a display of glamour and a fortress of money, where risk was calculated and profits were guaranteed by design. By the mid-1950s, Las Vegas was no longer just a gambling town. It was the crown jewel of the Mafia's empire, a city built by organized crime but polished and perfected into a fantasy world. Tourists saw glitz, glamour, and entertainment. Mobsters saw power, control, and a river of money flowing endlessly through their hands. Every slot machine pulled, every bet placed, every performance watched contributed to the empire. It was an empire built on dollars, desire, and daring, a testament to the vision of men who had turned a desert into a kingdom. And in the quiet moments, when the lights dimmed and the casinos emptied, the real story of Vegas could be seen in the empty chips stacked in secure rooms, the ledgers that recorded every transaction, and the satisfied smiles of mob bosses who knew they had built something no one else could touch. This was more than money. This was power. This was legacy. The desert gamble had succeeded, and the mob had not just played the game. They had built it, owned it, and mastered it. The city never slept, and neither did the dreams of the men who had built it. Las Vegas in the 1950s was more than a town. It was a stage for excess, a living showcase of wealth, luxury, and audacity. The Flamingo had opened the door, but the empire grew far beyond it. Casinos sparkled like jewels in the desert night, their neon signs reflecting on polished floors where the rich and reckless placed bets that could change fortunes in a single hand. Behind the glitter, the Mafia orchestrated an empire so vast, so precise, that the city itself seemed to breathe their wealth. Mobsters lived like kings, though they rarely flaunted their true influence openly. Bugsy Siegel had set the tone, but now the families from Chicago, New York, and Cleveland were all in, each staking claims to portions of the desert, each ensuring that their wealth flowed steadily from every blackjack hand and roulette spin. They had learned the art of subtlety. Show the glitz, hide the flow. Tourists saw glamour, entertainment, and risk. The mob saw profit, power, and control. Every cocktail poured, every showgirl danced, every high-stakes bet played out like a carefully calculated move on a chessboard. The showgirls were central to this spectacle. They were more than performers. They were the living symbols of Vegas luxury. Costumed in feathers, sequins, and glittering jewels, they drew crowds, commanded attention, and made the casinos irresistible. Men flocked to the tables, enchanted by the bright lights and the promise of indulgence. And as they spent, the mob's empire expanded invisibly beneath the surface. Each ticket bought for a show, each high-limit bet placed in a private room, every sip of champagne served with a smile contributed to a river of cash flowing unseen into the Mafia's coffers. Luxury suites and private gaming rooms became the core of the operation. Only the wealthiest were allowed inside, where the stakes were higher, the air thicker with the scent of cigars and perfume, and the numbers on the tables far larger than any casual player would imagine. In these rooms, every movement was calculated. Chips were carefully stacked, games subtly influenced, and money extracted with the precision of an accountant rather than a criminal. The mob's genius lay in invisibility. To the guests, it was chance. To the families, it was certainty. Every bet added to the fortune. Every bet was another brick in the empire they had constructed. Nightclubs and restaurants complemented the casinos perfectly. They were glamorous facades, each meticulously designed to entertain and distract, ensuring visitors never questioned how the money was really moving. The mob controlled every detail: which bands played, which waiters were hired, which entertainers performed. These were not just decisions of style, they were decisions of profit. Each successful event drew in more guests, each new attraction ensured more bets, and every dollar spent inside these establishments ultimately flowed back to the families who had built Las Vegas from scratch. The wealth of the mob was staggering, and they flaunted it subtly. Tailored suits, luxury cars, and exquisite jewelry were the symbols of status within their ranks. The bosses themselves rarely gambled publicly. They preferred to watch the money flow while maintaining an air of effortless control. But the message was clear. The Mafia was not just present in Vegas. They ruled it. The city's energy, its lights, its very pulse came from them, and they had designed it that way. Yet, for all its glamour, the mob's empire in Las Vegas depended on discipline, secrecy, and precision. The cash flow was complex, layered, and hidden behind legal structures, front businesses, and layers of accounts designed to obscure the origin of the funds. Every casino had multiple streams of income: table games, slot machine shows, hotel rooms, food, drinks, and private events. Each stream was monitored, recorded, and directed to ensure that the mob received their share before anyone else. No dollar went astray. No profit was wasted. It was a machine, and Vegas was the engine. The empire's reach extended beyond the city itself. Casinos weren't isolated businesses. They were hubs in a network of investments, laundering operations, and secret profits. Money would flow from a blackjack table into private accounts, then on to families back east, funding new operations, new expansions, and new ventures. The cycle was endless, seamless, and nearly invisible to outsiders. The tourists thought they were playing for fun. The mob knew they were playing for profit. As the 1950s progressed, Las Vegas transformed under the Mafia's touch. The city's skyline rose, hotels and casinos multiplied, and the empire expanded into an ever-growing network of entertainment and finance. Showgirls became icons, stars of a glittering world. Nightclubs and restaurants flourished, adding layers of profit to the casino's base earnings. High-stakes rooms operated like private banks, handling sums most people couldn't imagine, and everywhere the money moved silently, flowing from the public's desire to gamble into the Mafia's empire of wealth. But wealth alone wasn't enough. Vegas became a stage for power, influence, and prestige. The mob controlled who got access, who could perform, who could gamble, and who could be seen in the inner sanctums of the casinos. High rollers were courted carefully, their loyalty rewarded with attention, luxury, and status, all while ensuring that the families remained the ultimate beneficiaries. Even the city's growth and development were influenced by the mob's decisions, where hotels would rise, which streets would thrive, which attractions would draw crowds. Las Vegas was more than a city. It was a carefully orchestrated empire. Every night, the city glimmered, alive with possibility, excitement, and danger. The mob watched from the shadows, their wealth growing with every hand dealt, every chip stacked, every show performed. They lived extravagantly, but strategically. Cars, clothes, jewelry, and private residences displayed their success without drawing unnecessary attention. They had learned to balance spectacle with control, excess with discretion. Every dollar was accounted for, every investment maximized, and every operation executed with precision. And yet, despite all the glamour, there was a constant tension underlying the empire. Maintaining control required vigilance. Casinos were complex machines, and a single misstep could threaten profits. The families needed to monitor the flow of money carefully, ensure that operations remained smooth, and manage personnel meticulously. Showgirls, entertainers, dealers, and high rollers all played a part in the system, whether they knew it or not. The mob had built an ecosystem in which every participant, every detail, and every transaction served the empire. By the end of the decade, the results were undeniable. Las Vegas had become the beating heart of the Mafia's empire, a city built on calculated risk, luxury, and hidden flows of cash. The empire was vast, intricate, and stunningly effective. Every neon sign, every show, every spinning roulette wheel contributed to a network of wealth unlike any the world had ever seen. The mob's gamble had paid off. The desert had been transformed into a kingdom, a shining testament to vision, audacity, and control. And through it all, the mob maintained their edge. The city glimmered for the public, but it belonged to them. Every bet, every spin, every dollar moved precisely as they intended. Las Vegas was theirs, not just by presence, but by design. The wealth was monumental, the influence undeniable, and the empire unstoppable. They had taken a desert and turned it into a fortune, a spectacle, and a legacy that would outlast any individual. Every night, as the lights shone and the dice rolled, the mob's money flowed like a river through the city, invisible yet absolute. Proof that in Las Vegas, the house didn't just win, it owned the game. Las Vegas had grown beyond anything anyone had imagined. The desert was no longer a barren wasteland. It was a city pulsing with lights, glamour, and unimaginable wealth. The mob had turned a risky gamble into an empire, and at its peak, there was hardly a corner of the city untouched by their influence. Every casino, every nightclub, every hotel carried the fingerprints of organized crime, though the casual visitor would never suspect a thing. The lights dazzled, the dice rolled, and the money flowed like a river, unstoppable and invisible to the world outside. The mob didn't just own the city, they lived it. They drove through the streets in luxury cars, their tailored suits sharp, watches glinting under the neon glow. They dined in the finest restaurants, entertained at private suites, and watched the world gamble millions while their own fortunes grew by the second. But even amidst the extravagance, everything was calculated. Every dollar spent was a part of the machine, every display of wealth serving a purpose. Vegas was a stage, and the mob were both performers and directors, controlling the show from behind the scenes. The casinos themselves had become machines of precision. Each table, each slot machine, each roulette wheel was designed to maximize profits without ever appearing unfair. High rollers were courted with private rooms, champagne, and personal attention, while ordinary gamblers provided steady streams of cash across the floors. Showgirls, entertainers, and performers drew crowds with dazzling spectacles, ensuring that every visitor stayed longer and spent more. The money moved invisibly, flowing through ledgers into accounts, and then out to families across the country. The mob had created a system where wealth generated itself, and the city's energy fed directly into their pockets. But money wasn't the only reward. Influence grew alongside it. The mob decided who could perform, which stars could appear, which events could draw the most attention. Las Vegas became a playground for the powerful, and the mob controlled access to it. They could make careers, create legends, and elevate ordinary nights into unforgettable experiences, all while their profits grew exponentially. Each casino wasn't just a building. It was a hub of power, culture, and financial dominance. The peak of the empire brought unprecedented wealth. Millions flowed in daily, and the mob's fortunes were beyond comprehension. They invested in new properties, expanded existing ones, and diversified into entertainment, hospitality, and leisure. The desert, once a wasteland, had become a network of opulent hotels, bustling casinos, and glamorous nightlife. Every new attraction drew visitors, every event ensured more money, and every high-stakes bet guaranteed that the mob stayed on top. But with wealth came lifestyle. Mobsters lived extravagantly, though with a careful hand. Luxury cars, elegant homes, and tailored suits were common, yet every display of wealth was strategic. They entertained guests in lavish private suites, attended extravagant parties, and mingled with the elite. But nothing was left to chance. Every connection, every alliance, every handshake mattered in the ongoing game of influence and control. Las Vegas was more than a city. It was a living network, and the mob were its heart. Behind the glitz, the money was everywhere. Slot machines, roulette tables, poker rooms, and high-stakes games funneled cash through a complex, invisible system. Every visitor played their part in generating wealth. Each cocktail bought, every show ticket purchased, every hand of blackjack was absorbed into the mob's carefully orchestrated empire. The operation was seamless, precise, and unstoppable, and the families collected profits that would have been unimaginable in any other city. As the empire expanded, Las Vegas itself became a testament to the mob's vision and audacity. Streets were lined with neon, hotels towered over the desert, and the city's energy pulsed with life. Yet, no one outside the inner circles fully understood the depth of the control. The city's allure masked the true engine behind it: organized crime, running an empire of wealth, influence, and spectacle. Tourists saw fortune and luxury. Mobsters saw power and legacy. Every bet, every spin, every glamorous event ensured that the empire remained untouchable. The mob's empire also left a cultural mark. The image of Las Vegas, the lights, the showgirls, the Rat Pack glamour, was created by these men. They didn't just build casinos, they built an identity for a city. A fantasy world where excess was celebrated, risk was thrilling, and fortune seemed attainable for anyone. And while the money flowed silently into their pockets, the city became a stage for legends, dreams, and stories that would be told for generations. Yet the greatest achievement wasn't just the wealth or the power, it was the permanence of the empire. The mob had transformed the desert, created an economy, and built a culture that would outlast individuals. The Flamingo, the Desert Inn, the Sands, the Sahara, all symbols of a vision realized, all testaments to the audacity and intelligence of the men who had built them. Las Vegas was theirs in every sense, every table, every stage, every light, and every dollar reflected the empire that had been carved from nothing but sand, ambition, and risk. And so, at the height of the Mafia's control, the city shimmered, the desert glowed with neon, the casinos buzzed with excitement, and the money never stopped flowing. The mob had mastered the game, not just at the tables, but in the very heart of the city. Las Vegas was more than a city of chance. It was the mob's playground, a monument to risk, vision, and wealth, and a legacy that would last long after the men themselves had gone. Every night, the lights reflected off the desert sky, every jackpot, every high-stakes hand, every glittering show added to the story. The mob had turned a gamble into a kingdom, and the empire they built was as permanent as the desert itself. In Vegas, the house didn't just win, it owned the game, and the mob owned the house. The money, the power, and the glamour all flowed seamlessly into their empire, leaving behind a city that shone brighter, glittered harder, and told the world a story of ambition, audacity, and ultimate control. The desert gamble had reached its peak. The empire was vast, the wealth monumental, and the legacy undeniable. Las Vegas would never be the same, and the story of the Mafia's rise in the city was one of vision, risk, and unmatched mastery of both wealth and spectacle. The mob had not just played the game, they had built it, controlled it, and perfected it. The city was theirs, the money theirs, and the legend eternal. Las Vegas had grown into a city that dazzled the world, yet few understood the true engine behind its endless lights and glittering allure. By the time the 1960s rolled around, the mob's influence was absolute. They controlled the city not through fear alone, but through the flow of money, the control of entertainment, and the creation of a lifestyle that everyone wanted to be part of. From the casino floors to the backstage of every show, their fingerprints were everywhere, invisible to the casual eye, undeniable to anyone who knew how the city really worked. The mob had perfected the art of running Las Vegas like a machine. Every casino operated under a strict system of efficiency and secrecy. Money flowed in predictable patterns, and every high-stakes room, every slot machine, every roulette wheel contributed to the endless river of wealth. The tourists believed they were playing for chance, for luck, for the thrill of winning. But in reality, they were unwitting participants in an empire meticulously designed to extract and multiply profits. Showgirls, entertainers, and performers were central to the strategy. They were not just there to dazzle the visitors. They were part of the system. Their presence kept guests entertained, kept tables full, and ensured the energy of the casinos never dropped. The mob understood human psychology. Luxury, spectacle, and indulgence encouraged spending, and the more money people spent, the richer the empire became. Every show, every performance, every dazzling costume contributed to the hidden flow of cash behind the glittering facade. Private suites became the pinnacle of mob-controlled wealth. High rollers were courted with extreme care, offered exclusive games, personalized attention, and access to rooms no ordinary visitor could enter. Here, millions exchanged hands every night. The mob profited not only from the games themselves, but from the aura of exclusivity they created. These rooms became the ultimate profit centers, hidden from public view, yet central to the empire's growth. But the empire wasn't just about collecting money. It was about influence. The mob decided who could rise, who could perform, and who could participate in the highest stakes. They controlled the entertainment, the hospitality, and even the architecture of the city. Every new hotel, every nightclub, every casino expansion reflected a vision of organized crime. Vegas was their playground, their stage, and their legacy all at once. The money flowed in more ways than one. Casinos, restaurants, nightclubs, and entertainment venues created multiple streams of revenue, all quietly funneled back to the families controlling the empire. Every tip jar, every show ticket, every jackpot was accounted for. Every dollar was part of the larger network, a meticulously maintained system that ensured profits never slowed. The mob's genius lay in its subtlety. The public saw a city of pleasure and excess, but the mob saw a vast, organized, and almost unstoppable operation of wealth. As Vegas grew, so did the audacity of its rulers. Investments were made into new ventures, partnerships formed with wealthy investors, and the city expanded at a pace that amazed outsiders. Hotels rose higher, casinos grew larger, and entertainment became more elaborate. The mob's touch was everywhere, on the casino floors, in the management offices, even in the streets that led visitors to the glittering lights. Every expansion, every new attraction, every improvement fed into the empire, generating more money and cementing control. Yet for all its extravagance, the empire demanded discipline. The mob maintained tight control over personnel, finances, and operations. Dealers, managers, and performers were carefully vetted, and every transaction was tracked. The showgirls and entertainers might have been the face of the empire, but the backbone was an invisible system of ledgers, accounts, and strategic oversight. The empire could not thrive on chaos alone. It required precision, foresight, and the intelligence to balance risk and reward. By the height of their control, the mob had created not just wealth, but culture. Vegas became a symbol of glamour, indulgence, and desire, a city that attracted the rich, the famous, and the adventurous. The Rat Pack, celebrities, and socialites flocked to the casinos, unaware of how much of the city's heartbeat depended on organized crime. The Mafia had built more than an empire of money. They had built an identity, a fantasy world that would define the city for decades to come. Every night, the lights of Vegas reflected the power of the mob. Slot machines chimed, roulette wheels spun, and the dice rolled endlessly, feeding a system that few could comprehend. Behind the laughter, the champagne, and the glittering shows, the families collected millions, their influence extending far beyond the city limits. The empire was self-sustaining, constantly growing, and brilliantly orchestrated. The mob had mastered Vegas completely. They had turned the desert into a kingdom of money and spectacle, a city where every detail was designed to generate wealth. The empire was built on vision, risk, and audacity. And while the tourists saw only glamour and excitement, the mob knew the truth. Every dollar, every bet, every show contributed to a machine that was theirs alone. The desert gamble had reached perfection. The empire was vast, the wealth unimaginable, and the legacy secure. Las Vegas was no longer just a city. It was a monument to the Mafia's vision, a living testament to the audacity of those who could see opportunity where others saw only sand. The mob had not just played the game. They had designed it, controlled it, and perfected it. And as the neon lights reflected on the desert sky, as the casinos buzzed with life and money moved invisibly through the city, it was clear that the mob's empire had achieved immortality. Every jackpot, every show, every high-stakes hand was a part of the story, a chapter in the saga of power, wealth, and vision that had transformed a dusty desert town into the shining jewel of the American West. Las Vegas belonged to them, not in law, not in title, but in spirit, design, and profit. The desert gamble had paid off, and the empire was eternal. The story of Las Vegas is not just the story of neon lights, glitzy casinos, or the endless clatter of chips on velvet tables. It is the story of vision, risk, and audacity. The story of men who saw opportunity in the desert where others saw nothing but sand. Bugsy Siegel lit the spark with the Flamingo, turning a dusty outpost into a dream of luxury and excess. From there, the mob expanded, building an empire that touched every corner of the city, every slot machine, every roulette wheel, every dazzling show. Money flowed endlessly through their hands, invisible to the world outside. The high rollers, the showgirls, the glittering lights. They were all part of a carefully orchestrated machine, a system that ensured the families controlling the city grew richer with every hand dealt, every bet placed, every jackpot won. Las Vegas became both playground and profit center, a place where entertainment and organized crime existed in perfect balance. The empire the mob created was more than financial. It was cultural. The Rat Pack, the glamorous nightlife, the iconic shows, the luxury suites and private rooms all reflected the vision of men who understood how to build desire, how to create spectacle, how to turn risk into revenue. Every element of the city, from the flashing neon to the elegance of the entertainers, was part of the larger picture, a city owned not just in money, but in influence and legacy. Yet behind the glamour and excess was precision, control, and calculation. The mob managed every detail, from the flow of cash to the management of personnel, ensuring that nothing threatened the empire they had painstakingly built. They had transformed a barren desert into a kingdom of wealth and power, a place where every visitor contributed unknowingly to a fortune that spanned states and generations. Las Vegas, as we know it today, owes its birth to that vision. The casinos, the shows, the culture, they are echoes of an empire built on audacity, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of wealth. Bugsy Siegel's dream became the mob's reality, and the empire they built left an indelible mark on the city, shaping it into the entertainment capital of the world. The mob's gamble had paid off. The empire they created thrived in secrecy, operated in precision, and dazzled the world. The desert was no longer empty. It was alive, pulsing with the energy of money, risk, and spectacle. And though the men themselves have long passed, their legacy lives on in every glittering light, every spinning wheel, and every jackpot echoing through the halls of Las Vegas. The city stands as a testament to visionaries, dreamers, and risk-takers. The men who turned sand into gold, chaos into order, and a dusty desert town into the ultimate empire of wealth and glamour. Las Vegas was built on the audacity of the mob, and every time the neon lights flicker and the dice roll, their story continues to play out, eternal and unstoppable. In the end, the desert gamble was more than a risk.